Hi, class. Tonight I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the task that I had for Chapter 3. My task was to look more at Hall and McKay's model of bureaucratic structure. So Hall developed a six central characteristics of bureaucratic structure when it came to measuring the structures of schools. Those six central characteristics were hierarchy of authority, specialization, rules of incumbents, procedures, specifications, impersonality, and technical competence. Out of those six central characteristics, four of them went under the bureaucratic domain, and the other two, which were specialization and personality, went under the professional domain. When we think about bureaucratic and professional domain, that pushes us to talk about the four types of schools that came out of this bureaucratic structure model and examining school structures. So those four types of school structures were authoritarian, professional structure, chaotic structure, and then the Weberian structure. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about each of those structures, which was something that Chapter 3, Hall and McCoy's model of bureaucratic structure pointed out. So we first look at the authoritarian structure. So the authoritarian structure is exactly what it says. It's aligned with the hierarchy of authority, and so it is kind of the principle of top down. So superiority, whatever the superior says goes. Kind of like what I say goes. Not much shared decision making, not shared power. It is pretty much authority. The person who has the power makes the rules, makes the orders, makes the decisions. All the regulations, procedures, and orders come from the top. And it's kind of like I guess you would say mechanical. It's like a mechanic. Things work in the order that they are supposed to work in from top to bottom. Everything works in order. No wiggle room, no flexibility. Everything works in order. And that's one of the structures, authoritarian. The second structure is the professional structure. This structure is more teacher centered. There's some delegation, shared decision making. So in schools, in organizations, and the school structure in schools as organizations, if a school structure is more professional than it is authoritarian, then that means that the teachers as professionals are part of the school process. They are part of the decision making, the rule making, the policy making, the regulation making. It is a shared process. And that was a second structure, a professional structure. Another structure was the chaotic structure, meaning just that. Authority was low, bureaucracy was low. It is chaotic, inconsistent, ineffective, confusion, and full of conflict. And unfortunately, some schools are of the chaotic structure. And the last structure was the Weberian structure, which was also a structure of shared power, and centralization and specialization are balanced. So it's an even grounds of centralization and specialization. So as I continue to read and as we continue to look at how school structures work, so of course no one will want to operate, work in, live in, or exist in a chaotic structure. And chaotic structures, in order to improve, tend to move to an authoritarian structure very quickly. Because what happens is when you have chaos, it immediately means that people think when new leadership comes into place, it should be new leadership, and new leadership are going to give new rules, new orders, new procedures. And so it automatically becomes an hierarchy of authority, and now you are in authoritarian structure. So it's easy for chaotic structured schools to move to schools that are high in authority. it's a little more challenging for those chaotic and authoritarian schools to move to more of the Weberian and the perfectional structured school, which are more teacher centered, shared power, and shared leadership. It's a little more challenging for those chaotic schools or those mechanical authoritarian schools to move into those structures that allow a little more flexibility, a little more shared ownership, a little more shared power. And so, when thinking about examining structures of school, examining the structure of schools, a few questions came up to me when thinking about the type of schools that are more chaotic or more professional or more authoritarian or more Weberian. My question was, what type of schools would lie in each of those structures? Are they urban schools, rural schools, suburban schools? That was one of the questions that began to develop in my thinking while reading Harlan McCoy's model of bureaucratic structure. I also got a chance to dive into the Designing Better Schools, the meaning and measure of enabling school structures, which also was more information about how schools are structured and how they operated. And so when looking at how schools operate. Schools are bureaucracies. They are structures with a hierarchy of authority, division of labor, impersonality, objective standards, technical competence, and rules and regulations. So schools have goals, schools have missions, schools have tasks, schools have responsibilities. Just like other organizations, schools are bureaucracies with goals, mission, tasks, responsibilities, and objectives to meet. And so when we thought about, or when we think about what Hoy and Sweetland says about designing better schools and the meaning and measure of enabling school structures, we can look at two things, two concepts: enabling versus coercive formalization, and enabling versus hindering centralization. And so when we look at formalization, we're looking at the rules and regulations, orders, and procedures. So school structures can function along those four school structure guidelines that we just or just shared with you from chapter 3, but they also can structure under enabling or coercive formalization, which means rules that are enabled or rules that are strictly compliant. And when we think about coercive formalization, that eliminates flexibility and autonomy. It doesn't give any room for individuality or collaboration. And a lot of times, schools and school leaders feel that their schools become more coercive when state take over or when state control comes in, because it is very strict, very rigid, by the law, by the book. No room for wiggle, no room for mistakes. Which mistakes is also something that will come up when we read more about mindful schools. And so rules are good. And so when we think about formalization, we do want to make known that rules are good. Rules provide direction, guidance, structure, and support. And when looking at bureaucracy, there are two sides to every story. So some people view bureaucracy as a negative aspect, or as a negative tool, or as a negative connotation. However, bureaucracy also can lead to job satisfaction, which is something that we read. And whether bureaucracy on your end is positive or negative, it is necessary. Rules, direction, guidance, and support are necessary. So when thinking about the fundamental features of bureaucracy, formalization, which is the formal rules and procedures, and centralization, which is a hierarchy of authority, are fundamental to the way schools operate. And so, going back to kind of what I said about there are two forms of formalization and there are two forms of centralization. coercive formalization, which means that it is strict, rigid by the book. It can lead to consequences, punishments. Teachers, schools who are under the structure of coercive formalization may push their teachers to move by threats, punishment, whereas enabling formalization gives teachers more of an opportunity to be a part of the rule-making process. Kind of more of the shared leadership. So when we think about centralization is focused on the hierarchy of authority. Who has control and who has the most control? And so there are two types of centralization. Enabling centralization, which is a shared power, shared leadership, collaboration, we're in this together form of centralization. And then there's a hindering centralization, which means where people are in authority are actually hindering teachers at schools, hindering teachers from being the best that they can be, or being a part of the school as an organization operating process. So regardless of enabling or coercive formalization or enabling or hindering centralization, you cannot escape structure in schools. It's required, it's necessary, and mandatory. So what the Designing Better Schools article was pretty much sharing with us is that it's not about whether or not there is structure. The question is the type of structure the school or the organization is putting off. And a lot of times what tends to happen is, and this article spoke about it a little bit, is that principals or the person in charge determines the type of structure the school lies within. And so even going back to what I was just sharing with you on how in McCoy's model of bureaucratic structures, the leaders determine a lot of times the type of structure that teachers and students exist in. And so for example, when we think about high centralization, which also equals coercive, so if it is high on the authoritarian or high centralization, which is high control from those at the top, the hierarchy of authority, those structures tend to lend to coercive formalization. For example, if a superintendent who is at the top of school districts tell principals who are at the top of schools that their students should be tested all the time, teachers are going to be over-testing their students. And they are over-testing their students because they were told that was a rule, procedure, or order by authority that they had to follow. And so when you think about more of enabling structures, superintendents may ask teachers for their opinion or for their support or for them to take a seat at the table to talk about what standardized testing should look like for students. How often should students be tested? And what is that data being used for? And so some other pieces of what I read were in this article is that enabling bureaucracy versus hindering bureaucracy. So pretty much what that pretty much was saying is that hindering rather than helping is on the extreme, which causes it hard for teachers to work, or cause it causes restraints on teachers when they are not able to work at the levels that they wish that they could or they should. So as I begin to read more about this article or more about the different structures, school structures that students, teachers, and schools operate in, my question began to be, what schools are more enabled bureaucracies versus hinder bureaucracies? It talked a little bit about the demographics of the schools that were a part of this study. And my question pretty much was that before they analyzed this study, what schools are more enabled bureaucracies versus hinder bureaucracies, and what conditions or factors of those schools cause them to be more enabled versus hinder bureaucracies? Or is it a type of principal, which talked a little bit about the personality of principals, which could lead them to being more hindering or more helping, more taking things as more as a and giving it as a punishment instead of an opportunity. So ultimately, enabling structures led to the development of trust. And so some of the conclusions that came from the enabling school structures with Hoy and Sweetland were that the conclusions from this study of enabling versus coercive and enabling versus hindering were prototypes. So the prototype for an enabling bureaucracy is a hierarchy that helps rather than hinders, and a system of rules and regulations that guides problem solving rather than punishes failures. Enabling school structures, principals and teachers work together while retaining their distinctive roles. The prototype for a hindering bureaucracy is a hierarchy that impedes and a system of rules and regulations that is coercive. The basic objective of hierarchy is to discipline compliance of teachers. There is underlying administrative assumption in hindering structures is that teachers' behavior must be closely managed and strictly controlled. And so ultimately, what the picture is saying that one that enable rather than hinders is the type of school structure that teachers are able to operate in when they trust their principals. And so but the ending of this, which was very valuable to me, was the statement, we postulate that better schools are possible. And one key ingredient to more effective schools is a school structure that enables participants to do their jobs more creatively, cooperatively, and professionally. Designing better schools seems seems truly connected to creating enabling school structures. So I then got to look at more of the analysis of enabling and mindful school structures. And so there was a connection between enabling and mindful school structures. And I took notes on some key concepts or some things that I thought were really important about mindful and enabling perspectives. So mindful and enabling perspectives both have emphasis on learning from mistakes, which in these structures, in these school structures, teachers have time to teach. They have time to learn, they have time to grow, they have time to trust, they have time to fail, and they have time to do better. So in mindful structures, it is promotion of asking questions, admitting the mistakes, and being open. And I think that in enabling structures and mindful structures, teachers truly feel safe enough to question rules, to be a part of the shared process, because that's what enabling formalization does, allows teachers to be a part of the shared process. So mindful structures are allowing teachers to ask questions about rules, and enabling structures are allowing teachers to share thoughts about rules. And so a mindful structure and enabling structure together can promote student achievement and teacher support and teacher growth. So enabling and mindful structures are complementary, supporting each other. Learning organizations, which are our schools, are organizations that are both enabling and mindful. Coercive organizations are organizations that are mindless and hindering. And so, when thinking about the type of school structure that I would like to operate in, I truly believe that I will be more successful, and my student achievement will be better in a structure that is professional, a bureaucratic professional structure, an enabling formalization structure, an enabling centralization structure, and a mindful structure. So my question to you is, what type of school structure do you think you will be most successful in? And what do you think are some of the factors that cause schools to be less enabling, more coercive, more hindering, and more mindless, and then end up in the chaotic structure region? Thanks for hearing my thoughts. I really enjoyed reading chapter 3, learning about school structures. It gave me a lot of insight on the things I can look at and questions I can ask teachers when being concerned or wanting to know a little bit more about the structures in which students are excelling or not. Thank you.